I was quietly sitting at a VIP investor table when a billionaire CEO's son ordered security to drag me out of my chair. The problem was, I was the one person in the room who controlled whether his company received a $2.4 billion investment. The first thing I noticed wasn't the music. It was the quiet around my chair. Not the obvious kind of silence, more the polite kind that spreads when people at a table are quietly wondering if someone actually belongs there. Crystal glasses clinked across the ballroom. Soft jazz floated beneath the chandeliers. Waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne, moving so smoothly they almost looked like part of the decoration. But at table 3, the conversation slowed the moment I sat down. I didn't realize it yet, but the chair I had taken was about to turn into a very expensive problem for someone in that room. My name is Elena Ford. I'm 48 years old. And that night, I was seated in the VIP section at the Valerian Technologies Investor Gala in Chicago. If someone glanced at me quickly, nothing about me seemed to explain why I was there. I didn't have an entourage. I wore no flashy jewelry. No assistant hovered nearby. Just a purple evening jacket, a quiet table, and a small white place card that read, E. Ford. Across the ballroom, investors were talking about valuations and expansion plans. Valspire's money closes tonight, right? One hedge fund manager asked his colleague. 2.4 billion, the other replied quietly, assuming everything goes smoothly. I folded my hands on the table and listened. Most of the people seated around me had already decided I must be someone's assistant. One man even leaned slightly in my direction with a polite smile. Another guest shifted his chair a little farther away from mine. "Excuse me," the man said softly. "Are you waiting for someone?" I tilted my head just a bit. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He blinked, clearly unsure whether I was serious. A second later, I heard a chair scrape across the floor behind me, followed by a young man's voice, confident and impatient. "Hold on." Footsteps stopped beside my chair. I looked up. He wasn't very tall, but he was sharply dressed, and he carried himself like someone who knew everyone in the room recognized him. Elliot Vance, the CEO's son. His eyes moved from my face down to the place card in front of me, then back again. A faint smile touched his lips. "Interesting," he murmured. He tapped the edge of the table, making sure the people around us could hear. "You're sitting in the wrong seat." I glanced down once more at the card in front of me, then looked back at him. "Am I?" Elliot leaned a little closer. "Yeah," he said calmly. He gestured toward the empty chair beside him. "That seat is reserved for my girlfriend." I didn't move. That was the moment the entire table began paying attention. Elliot's smile grew sharper. "Let me ask you something," he continued. "Do you actually know who that seat was meant for?" Elliot Vance didn't look like a man who was used to being questioned. He stood beside the table with the easy confidence of someone who had grown up watching rooms rearrange themselves for his family. Behind him stood a woman wearing a gold evening gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights every time she moved. Sierra Cole. She rested one hand lightly on Elliot's arm while studying me the way someone studies an object that's been placed in the wrong spot. Elliot looked down again at the card in front of me. E. Ford. He picked it up between two fingers and turned it slightly as if checking whether someone had made a mistake. Then he placed it back on the table. A faint smile appeared again. "Well," he said, "that explains the confusion." "Does it?" I asked. His tone stayed calm, almost friendly. "This VIP seat is for my girlfriend." He gestured toward Sierra, as if that alone should make everything clear to everyone at the table. Sierra tilted her head slightly. "I'm sure it's just a mix-up," she said smoothly, though her voice carried a dismissive edge. "Events like this can be confusing for people who aren't used to executive sections." Someone at the table shifted awkwardly in their chair. Another guest quietly lowered his glass. Across the room, a camera flash went off. I looked down once more at the place card in front of me, then back at Elliot. This seat was assigned to me. The words were simple and quiet, but they clearly weren't what Elliot expected to hear. His smile thinned. You might want to check again. I already did. Sierra let out a small laugh. Elliot, honestly, she murmured, just loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. Maybe she's just waiting for whoever she's assisting tonight. Several people nearby suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. But no one got up. Moments like this tend to pull people in. Attention shifted toward us from every direction. Across the table, someone slowly raised a phone. Elliot leaned forward a little and lowered his voice. Look, he said, I don't want to make this awkward. He pointed to the empty chair beside him. My girlfriend is sitting here. I folded my hands calmly on the table. And I'm sitting here. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The music drifting through the ballroom suddenly seemed louder. Elliot straightened up, and the relaxed look on his face disappeared. He turned toward the aisle where hotel staff were moving between tables, and his voice carried clearly across the VIP section. Security! 3 guards looked up right away. Elliot pointed directly at me without the slightest hesitation. Security, remove her. The guards reacted instantly. In rooms like that, authority is rarely questioned. One of them stepped beside my chair. Ma'am, he said quietly, I'm going to need you to leave this seat. I looked up at him. This seat was assigned to me. He shifted uncomfortably but didn't move away. Behind him, Elliot crossed his arms. You heard me, he said, louder now. That seat is taken. Sierra stood just behind his shoulder, watching with the calm satisfaction of someone who expected the situation to resolve itself. Honestly, she said softly, this doesn't have to turn into a scene. At the table next to us, someone slowly turned their chair to watch. Another guest lifted a phone. The guard tried again. Ma'am, please stand. I'm already sitting where I'm supposed to be. That was the moment Elliot's patience ran out. He pointed sharply at the chair. My girlfriend is sitting there, he said. And you're not. The guard hesitated for just a second. Then he reached for my arm. His hand closed around my sleeve and he pulled. My chair scraped loudly across the floor as he lifted me out of it. For a moment, I stood beside the table in front of more than 200 guests, like someone who had just been caught sitting somewhere she didn't belong. Some people looked away. Others didn't. Phones were raised now, recording everything. For a few seconds, the ballroom music kept playing, as if nothing unusual had happened. Then the flashes started. Cameras. Whispering voices spreading through the VIP section. The moment had turned into a spectacle. The guard let go of my arm once I was standing. I calmly smoothed my sleeve. Across the table, Elliot looked pleased with himself. Sierra leaned closer to him, whispering something I couldn't hear. For a brief second, I thought about simply leaving. It would have been the easiest choice. But then I remembered exactly why I had been invited to that table. I looked straight at Elliot. You might want to think carefully about what just happened, I said. He gave a short laugh. Oh? My voice stayed steady. What you just did cost your father $2.4 billion. For a moment, the entire table went quiet. Then Elliot laughed out loud. Right, he said. Sure it did. A few people at nearby tables chuckled nervously, but the cameras kept recording and the silence spreading through the room didn't disappear. Then a voice cut through everything behind us. Sharp, controlled, and very close. Take your hands off her. Now. The guard froze the second he heard it. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry, but it carried enough authority to slice straight through the entire VIP section. Take your hands off her. Now. A woman stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. She wore a green tailored jacket, stood with perfect composure, and her eyes were already analyzing the situation like a legal case unfolding in real time. Several people at the table recognized her immediately. Mira Solari, someone whispered. Deputy General Counsel of Valerian Technologies. She didn't waste a second. Her eyes went straight to the guard's hand. I said release her. The guard stepped back at once. Across the table, Elliot frowned, clearly irritated. This is unnecessary, he said. She's just sitting in the wrong. Mira raised one hand slightly. The interruption was quiet, but absolute. Behind her, another man pushed through the ring of guests. Martin Doyle, head of investor relations. He looked like he had arrived in a hurry. His eyes moved quickly from Elliot to the empty chair and then to the place card sitting on the table in front of me. E. Ford. He picked up the card. For a moment, he simply stared at it. Then Martin's expression changed. He slowly placed the card back on the table. Elliot, he said quietly. Something in his voice made a few nearby guests lean closer. You might want to step back. Elliot frowned. Why? Martin didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around at the guests standing nearby. Phones were still raised. Cameras were still pointed in our direction. He took a slow breath. Before this gets any worse, he said, raising his voice just enough for the VIP section to hear. Let me clarify something. He gestured toward me. This is Elena Ford. Several people at nearby tables glanced down again at the place card. E. Ford, the same card Elliot had dismissed only a minute earlier. I didn't say anything. I didn't offer an explanation. Across from me, Elliot still looked unimpressed. And that's supposed to mean what? He asked. Martin held his gaze for a moment. Then he spoke clearly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. She is the final compliance sign-off for Valspire Capital's investment in Valerian Technologies. For a moment, nobody moved. Then several guests slowly lowered their phones. The music in the ballroom was still playing, but around table 4, no one was listening anymore. The silence spread outward, past the VIP section, past the nearby tables, even past the servers who had quietly stopped walking between the chairs. That was when another voice cut through the room. What's going on here? People turned immediately. Daniel Vance had just stepped into the VIP section. When the CEO of Valerian Technologies entered a room, conversations usually shifted around him. Tonight was no different. But instead of the usual greetings and polite smiles, he walked into something else entirely. Stillness. He had arrived expecting a celebration. In less than 5 minutes, he was supposed to step onto the stage and announce the largest investment deal the company had ever secured. Instead, he stopped in the middle of the aisle. His eyes quickly scanned the scene. His son standing beside the table. Sierra frozen next to him. 2 security guards backing away. Mira Solari and Martin Doyle standing between the crowd and the table. And everywhere, phones recording. Daniel's expression tightened. Someone explain. No one spoke right away. Martin finally stepped forward. Sir, he said carefully, your son just had security remove the person responsible for Valspire Capital's final compliance sign-off from her assigned seat. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Then he slowly turned toward Elliot. Elliot lifted both hands defensively. I thought she was staff, he said quickly. She was sitting in the wrong section. Daniel didn't raise his voice, but the look he gave his son was sharp enough to stop him mid-sentence. Then his attention shifted to me. This time he studied my face more carefully, clearly recalculating the situation. When he spoke again, his tone had changed completely. Miss Ford, he said cautiously, I believe there's been a misunderstanding here. He briefly glanced at the crowd around us, the phones, the cameras. Perhaps we should step aside and discuss this privately. Before anyone could move, Mira Solari spoke. Her voice stayed calm, but her words carried weight. This entire incident was recorded. Daniel's eyes flicked upward toward the cameras mounted along the ballroom ceiling. Then he looked back at the phones still raised around the table. And in that moment, something shifted. This was no longer a simple seating dispute at a gala. It had become documented behavior. The executive lounge was just a short hallway away from the ballroom. But once the door closed behind us, the atmosphere changed immediately. The music disappeared. So did the polite smiles. Inside the room, 4 people sat across from me. Daniel Vance, Valerian's CFO, Derek Hargate, Mira Solari, and Martin Doyle. For several seconds, no one spoke. Daniel finally leaned forward, folding his hands together. "Miss Ford," he began carefully, "what happened downstairs was clearly a misunderstanding." The word hung in the air. No one at the table seemed particularly comfortable with it. I didn't argue. Instead, I asked a question. Was tonight's gala live-streamed to investors? Daniel blinked slightly. Mira answered first. Yes. She opened a tablet on the table and pulled up the event dashboard. The ballroom cameras are recording, she said. Parts of the event are also being streamed to several institutional partners. She paused briefly. And the footage is archived. I nodded once. Then I opened the thin folder I had placed on the table. Derek Hargate shifted in his chair the moment he recognized the document. "The investment agreement?" he murmured. I turned a page. "There's a clause in this contract," I said calmly. "It's called the Leadership Conduct and Reputation Provision." Derek leaned closer to the table. His finger traced the paragraph as he read silently. His expression slowly tightened. Daniel looked between us. "What does it say?" Derek cleared his throat. "It states that any conduct by senior leadership or affiliated representatives that materially damages the reputation of the transaction during the closing period." He paused, reading the next line more carefully. "May trigger the investor's right to withdraw capital immediately." Silence filled the room. Martin shifted slightly in his chair. Daniel leaned back. "Affiliated representatives," he repeated slowly. Mira looked at him. "That includes family members who are publicly associated with leadership." No one said Elliot's name. They didn't have to. Daniel exhaled slowly. "You're suggesting what happened at the table could activate this clause?" I closed the folder. The quiet sound of the paper settling against the table seemed louder than it should have. Then I met his eyes. "That clause exists for nights exactly like this." For a moment, no one spoke. Daniel Vance looked down at the contract again, as if the clause might somehow disappear if he read it a second time. It didn't. I rested my hands lightly on the folder in front of me. "You should probably understand how this works," I said. Derek Hargate looked up. Daniel watched me carefully. "My title at Valspire Capital is Director of Transaction Compliance." Daniel frowned slightly. "That doesn't sound like the person who decides whether billions of dollars move." "It isn't supposed to," I replied. The room went quiet again. "In large transactions," I continued, "investment funds don't allow a CEO or anyone else to release capital on their own." Martin nodded quietly. He already knew that. "The role exists for a reason," I said. "Someone independent has to verify that every condition of the agreement has been met." Derek shifted in his chair. "And if they haven't?" he asked. "Then the money doesn't move." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're saying that person is you in this transaction?" "Yes," I answered calmly. No one interrupted. "The first branch of Valspire's $2.4 billion commitment requires a final compliance authorization." I tapped the folder gently. "That authorization belongs to me." Derek glanced toward Daniel. Martin leaned back slightly as the meaning of that settled across the room. Daniel leaned deeper into his chair. "The deal was supposed to close tomorrow," he said quietly. It still could, I replied. That made Derek look up sharply. Daniel studied me for a long moment. Then he slowly exhaled. Give us until morning, he said. We'll review the situation and address it with the board. His voice carried the careful control of a man trying to keep a collapsing structure standing long enough to stabilize it. I'm not issuing an ultimatum, I said. I'm simply doing my job. There was no anger in my voice. No threats, just the quiet weight of procedure. I closed the folder and looked directly at him. I wasn't a guest tonight. A short silence filled the room. I was the last gate that money had to pass through. I left the executive lounge 2 minutes later. No one tried to stop me. The hallway outside the ballroom had grown quiet. The music from the gala sounded distant now, muffled behind the heavy doors. For a moment, I stood beside a window looking out over the city lights. Then I took out my phone. There was only one person I needed to call. Adrian Hale, managing partner of Valspire Capital. He answered almost immediately. Elena. I need to report an incident, I said. He didn't interrupt. I explained exactly what had happened. The CEO's son, the order to security, the guard pulling me out of the chair, the cameras, the live stream, the crowd watching. My voice stayed calm and factual the whole time. No emotion. No exaggeration. When I finished, the line stayed quiet for a moment. Then Adrian asked one question. Was it documented? I glanced down the hallway. A small security camera blinked softly from the ceiling. Yes. Another short pause. That's what I needed to know, he said. Meanwhile, inside the executive lounge, the night was only beginning. Daniel Vance had already started calling members of the board. Derek Hargate reopened the investment agreement and read the conduct clause again, more slowly this time. Mira Solari began reviewing the footage timeline with the legal team. Within an hour and a half, an emergency board call had been assembled. Some directors joined from their homes. Others connected from hotel rooms. A few stepped away from the gala itself to take the call. The discussion was tense. One director suggested issuing a formal public apology before the markets opened. Another proposed removing Elliott from any public role in the company immediately. But none of those ideas solved the real problem. The footage already existed, and so did the clause. At the center of the room sat Elliott. For the first time that night, he looked less certain. He kept glancing at the conference screen where the clause was displayed, as if reading it again might somehow change what it meant. This is ridiculous, Sierra said quietly beside him. It was just a chair. No one in the room answered her, because everyone else understood something she didn't. It had never been about the chair. Back on the phone, Adrian spoke again. His voice remained steady. If the clause was triggered, he said, we act. The first message arrived just after 8 in the morning. Derek Hargate saw it the moment he opened his inbox. The sender was Valspire Capital. The subject line was short, transaction update. Derek opened the email. He read it once, then again, then a third time. The wording didn't change. Valspire Capital formally withdraws its $2.4 billion capital commitment to the Valerian Technologies transaction. Effective immediately. Derek slowly leaned back in his chair. For a moment, he just stared at the screen. Then his phone began vibrating. Board members, partner banks, legal advisors, everyone asking the same question. What happened? Within minutes, the executive conference room was full. Daniel Vance stood at the head of the table reading the email in silence. No one spoke. Everyone in the room understood what that single sentence meant. The primary funding tranche had vanished, and with it, the structure supporting the rest of the deal. One director spoke quietly through the video call. If Valspire pulls out, the co-investors will follow. Another voice added, the banks won't close without the anchor capital. Derek placed a printed copy of the email on the table. The other commitments are already wavering, he said. One of the directors rubbed his forehead. How fast will the market hear about this? Fast, Mira Solari replied from the far end of the table. Too many people saw what happened last night. Across the city, my phone rang. Daniel Vance. His voice sounded different now, less confident. Elena, he said, we can fix this. I didn't interrupt. We can release a statement, he continued. Clarify what happened last night. Explain the situation to the market. Oh, he paused. We can still salvage the deal. I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. It was recorded. No anger, no emphasis. Just the fact. On Daniel's end of the call, the conference room door opened. Derek Hargate stepped inside holding another document. His face had the pale look of someone watching numbers disappear. He placed the paper on the table. The room read it together. A minute later, an internal notice was sent to senior leadership across the company. The message contained only one line. The Valspire transaction is terminated. The headlines began appearing before 11 in the morning. Most of them didn't mention the gala. They didn't mention the VIP table. They didn't mention the cameras or the security guard's hand on my arm. Financial news usually focuses on numbers, and this number was large enough to dominate every headline. Valspire Capital withdraws $2.4 billion investment from Valerian Technologies amid governance concerns. Inside Valerian, the consequences unfolded quickly. The board opened an internal investigation into what had happened at the gala. Directors wanted answers. Who had authorized security to remove an investor representative? Why hadn't anyone stepped in to stop it? How had the situation been allowed to escalate in front of cameras? Outside the company, the story spread more quietly. Short clips from the gala began circulating through investor circles, private chats, analyst groups, encrypted message threads. The names Elliot Vance and Sierra Cole started appearing in conversations they had never expected to be part of. Neither of them attended another public event after that. A few days later, several Valerian directors reached out to me personally. They asked about reopening negotiations, about governance reforms, about ways to rebuild trust. Every time I gave the same answer. Polite, short, unchanged. A deal doesn't collapse because of a party, I told them. It collapses because of what the party reveals. 2 weeks later, I was back in my office. The same desk, the same quiet stack of agreements waiting to be reviewed. One of my colleagues leaned against the doorway. I've been hearing that story everywhere, he said. The gala deal. He studied me for a moment. So tell me something. He nodded toward the file sitting on my desk. When exactly did that transaction die? I closed the folder and thought about the question for a moment. Then I answered. The moment someone in that room decided respect was optional. He raised an eyebrow. I added quietly, in business, respect isn't a courtesy. It's the price of admission. And that was the night a $2.4 billion deal disappeared. All because someone decided a stranger didn't belong at the table.